Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I want to thank all my colleagues who contributed to this bill, a number of them, and I realized there was a lot of interest, Mr. Speaker, because it's something about the public service values and principles. Amendment Bill, National Assembly, number 46 of 2022. Mr. Speaker, Senator Ledama, myself, Senator Crystal Lasige, and a number, Senator Tobiko, a number of senators, Mr. Speaker, did contribute, and I want to appreciate for finding time, sharing their thoughts, Mr. Speaker, because I know public service is one of the key components in the development of any country. I know in counties, Mr. Speaker, and I hope when we pass this bill, it will be reflective, Mr. Speaker, of what happens at County Public Service Board. Mr. Speaker, the upshot of this bill in quick succession is Article 10 on principles of good governance and national values, Mr. Speaker, and also Article 232 on values of public service, Mr. Speaker. Mainly is integrity, it is issues of transparency, issues of hard work, issues of commitment, Mr. Speaker, and I think these are virtues and values that should be ingrained in any public servant, Mr. Speaker. I know us as members of the Senate and members of Parliament or in leadership position, Mr. Speaker, are people, Mr. Speaker, who should also hold those values and principles, Mr. Speaker. Finally, Mr. Speaker, we want to see our public service being professional, Mr. Speaker. We want to encourage that we use meritocracy, Mr. Speaker, because in many instances, especially in the public sector, Mr. Speaker, we have seen situations where as people get closer to the governance, the corporate governance and decision makers of chief executive managing directors, Mr. Speaker, there is always not so much meritocracy. So I want to challenge the Public Service Commission that they need, Mr. Speaker, to look at meritocracy, to look at professionalizing our public service, Mr. Speaker. More so, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the County Public Service Board, Mr. Speaker. When you go to most counties, public service boards of the counties has been politicized, Mr. Speaker. Most of the governors, and a number of them, like Kisii Governor, Mr. Speaker, did an head count, did audit of workers, but they have never given us the report as to what really happened, Mr. Speaker, because we have had this misnomer. Most governors will always tell you they are ghost workers, but there is no such report on head count and audit, Mr. Speaker, of human resource within the counties, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, I saw also the EACC and DCI the other day, they found a number of public servants, Mr. Speaker, or with the fake or fictitious academic documentation that they are presented, Mr. Speaker. We want to call upon that. Let us professionalize, let us maintain integrity within the public service sector. More so to counties, I wish, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, that going into the future, I pray one day that no matter who is a governor of any specific county, any worker within that county should not be worried that there is a change of governor or another governor is coming. Let us professionalize the public service, even at the County Public Service Board, Mr. Speaker. I know when I say this, Senator Onyonga gets fired up because of the challenges he's facing at Kisii County, Mr. Speaker. But I know in fullness of time, as we inculcate and indoctrinate, we would want to see professional public service in Meru County, Mr. Speaker, where you come from, Mr. Speaker. We don't want an also to challenge workers that work in county. When you serve, you are serving office of the county governor. You are not serving an individual. I have seen situation when a governor is not re-elected or a governor finishes his term. Some workers or some within county governments become sick and lose hope. Since they were serving that individual, they were not serving a county. So I want to challenge county workers, serve the county government, don't serve an individual governor. And that is how we'll professionalize our public service and public sector in general, Mr. Speaker. And I have seen also, we want to advise, to ask courts also, Mr. Speaker, in the Labor Relations Act, Article 232, and other values, Mr. Speaker, to also be considered before making rulings, especially on labor disputes, Mr. Speaker. We have seen courts are just making labor, like the one against Kenya Revenue Authority staff that were hired, Mr. Speaker. If such matter can be reviewed, it has been overtaken by events because most of those young people, Mr. Speaker, have reported to duty. And we want to collect more taxes to ensure the president and the Kenya Kwanza government have sufficient revenue to transform this country, Mr. Speaker. So I want to ask courts also to be sensitive when they are making decisions, especially concerning issues of labor disputes, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to thank your office and other stakeholders. I want to thank my brother, member of National Assembly, Mheshimiwa Rahim Daud, who coincidentally comes from your county, for coming together so that we co-sponsor. My challenge, Mr. Speaker, I want to challenge my colleagues from the both sides, both minority and majority. Let us use this strategy of co-sponsoring. When you have a bill here, look for a co-sponsor at the National Assembly. When a bill comes from the National Assembly, work with our colleagues, because in any way, we must work together for the betterment of Kenyans. So, Mheshimiwa Rahim Daud, we have worked together, Mr. Speaker, for this bill. I want to encourage the majority and minority rights. Let us co-sponsor this bill going into the future. With many remarks, Mr. Speaker, I beg to second and request that the putting of question be deferred until a later date as per the standing orders. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Chalgei. Let's go to the next order.
Order number 13, the County Boundaries Bill, Senate Bills number 6 of 2023, second reading.
Yes, Senator Moses Kajwang.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that the County Boundaries Bill 2023 be read a second time. Mr. Speaker, this bill is not foreign to the Senate and not foreign to senators. This is a fourth attempt by Parliament to have a legislative framework that gives effect to Article 188 of the Constitution. Article 188 of the Constitution talks about alteration of county boundaries. Mr. Speaker, this bill had previously been brought to this House under the sponsorship of Senator Mutula Kilonzo, and there have been about 3 attempts. There have been all sorts of arguments against the approach that we had taken in the past. At some point, the National Assembly vetoed it, saying that it was a money bill, that it was proposing a charge on the consolidated fund. And the latest attempt, this bill died due to lack of concurrence between the speakers of both houses. But this is a very important legislation. The team that was in Bomas, the National Dialogue Committee, flagged the issue of county boundaries as one of the key issues around cohesion that needed to be dealt with. And I took note that whereas the National Dialogue Committee made certain legislative proposals for the other pieces of laws that they felt should be enacted, when it came to the County Boundaries Bill, the National Dialogue Committee proposed that the bill that is currently before Parliament should be fast-tracked. And I do hope, Mr. Speaker, that this time this bill is going to get bipartisan support and bicameral support. The objective of this bill is to give effect to Article 188 of the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, the territory of Kenya is defined in Article 6 as comprising of the 47 counties that have been listed in the first schedule of the Constitution. The question has been, why do we have 47 counties and not 13 or not fewer, like Senator Khalwale has been reported as saying that we need fewer counties? Why do we have 47 counties? Mr. Speaker, when the team that was drafting the new constitution retreated in Naivasha, there was a rush to have a constitution that would be acceptable to all Kenyans. Initially, there was a formation that was in favor of counties along the lines of the existing provinces. There was a middle ground that was considering 13 counties, but then the team that carried the day is a team that convinced the committee meeting in Naivasha that we adopt the 46 districts plus Nairobi as captured in the Districts and Provinces Act of 1992. Mr. Speaker, if you ask me what the science was or what the logic was, some of the people who are in Naivasha, I think some of them are here, Senator Mugatana, was in the House around that time. I hope we'll benefit from their wisdom so that they can tell us what science there was. Senator Boni Khalwale was around and was very much involved in that process. So there was no magic. We just said, okay, let's take the Districts and Provinces Act of 1992. Mr. Speaker, in 1992, Kitui had just been split, and Kitui had gotten a new district. But that new district had not been gazetted, as at the time, people were in Naivasha. And so that is why the senator for Kitui still feels that we should have a 48th county along the lines of the districts that were there then. So that's the reason why we have 47 counties. Are they economically viable? That's a completely different question. Are the boundaries natural, or they are man-made, or they've been gerrymandered to take into account certain clan or tribal issues? I guess that's still up for discussion. Where do counties begin and end? That is another vexing question. Just last week, Nyamira and Kisii, otherwise very good neighbors. They speak the same language, they have the same history. Nyamira and Kisii, people are fighting over a market in Keroka. And you ask yourself, so what does this market have to do to challenge age-old cultural ties, people who speak the same language from the same clans? And if we are not careful, we are going to lose lives. In Vihiga, between Vihiga and Kisumu, there's a big fight about Maseno. And there is no session that we have held where we have not had a petitioner from Vihiga. In fact, it keeps the Devolution Committee and the Lands Committee very busy, issues to do with Vihiga. Makueni and Taita Taveta. Makueni and Taita Taveta are fighting over, I think there's a center called Mtitoandei. And it's driven by concerns around revenue. The governor, Makueni, wants to collect revenue in Mtitoandei. The people of Taita Taveta are saying that is historically their city, their town. Kericho Kisumu. Kericho Kisumu, Mr. Speaker, sometimes I fail to understand why we neighbors sometimes have to fight over issues of boundary. And yet, these are communities that have known each other even before they knew the white man. The people who live in Kisumu and the people who live in Kericho, most of them are generally Luos and members of the Kalenjin community. We knew each other before we knew the colonialists. But then issues of boundaries separate us. Isiolo and Meru, there have been issues, and it is on record that there are about 40 petitions with regards to county boundaries. Some of those petitions have come before the Senate, others have gone to the National Lands Commission, and others have found their way in court. So where counties end and begin is not captured in the Constitution. The Constitution only lists the 47 counties. But that description of where counties start and end is captured in the District and Provinces Act of 1992. And Mr. Speaker, the language used in the District and Provinces Act, Senator Mugatana will tell you, leaves a lot to be desired, because it is some language is not very accurate. Some of it is very descriptive. Some of it refers to natural features, which, because of climate change, they might not be there anymore. Some of it refers to rivers and streams. So it is important that we ensure that we concretize these issues to avoid the conflicts that we've seen around the counties. It might also be useful for senators to note that whereas in 1992 we had 46 plus 1 districts, plus 1 meaning Nairobi, between 1992 and 2002, President Moi had created 30 additional districts. And so by the time people were going to Naivasha to consider the new constitution, there were close to 77 districts. And so people had to roll back to 1992 as a better benchmark. How do you resolve these disputes across boundaries? And we have tried. Mr. Speaker, when I chaired the Devolution Committee, the matter of Vihiga and Kisumu came before my committee. And unfortunately, we responded to the petitioners that the Senate shall enact legislation to give effect to Article 188. And Senate sounded fairly helpless because we were not giving the petitioners a solution. We were giving them a promise. The only other alternative would have been for them to go to court, and the courts would still bring them back to the Senate because the courts cannot write laws. This bill, in attempting to provide a framework for dealing with boundary disputes, establishes the County Boundaries Mediation Committee as a first instance for dealing with boundary disputes. The County Boundaries Mediation Committee is an ad hoc committee, so it's not going to be a permanent thing that is there forever. And this County Boundaries Mediation Committee acts upon resolution of the Senate. So it has to be moved by the Senate. It is appointed by the President, and its composition, it comprises of officers of the national government, officers from counties government, and I saw during public participation there was need to include the National Cohesion and Integration Commission as part of the County Boundaries Mediation Committee. And I think that is an amendment that I find very reasonable, and we probably need to have the NCIC being part of this. So other members are from the National Lands Commission, a representative from surveyors, and a representative from the Council of Governors, and I think we can include the NCIC. So clause 5 of this bill is very clear on how a request to Senate should be shaped, how a request to Senate should be submitted for the establishment of a County Boundaries Mediation Committee. Now, that County Boundaries Mediation Committee can have various proposals. It can propose that the boundaries be altered. Now, if the Boundaries Mediation Committee proposes that the boundaries be altered, then we go to Article 188 of the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, Article 188 talks of instances or reasons that could lead to alteration of county boundaries. Now, an interesting reading of Article 188 is that it sounds like once those conditions have been fulfilled, and once a commission has been established by the President, and once the commission reports that a boundary should be altered, then that alteration takes effect. And I've been looking at Article 188 and comparing with Article 255, that says that anything that affects the structure of devolved governments is subject to a referendum. But Article 188 sounds very final. Mr. Speaker, these are some of the areas that we need to look into, because Article 188, from a plain reading, means that you can alter county boundaries without necessarily going into a referendum. And yet, it alters the structure of devolved governments, or the structure of devolution. So this bill has proposed a very high threshold. For you to propose the alteration of the boundary of a county, you must be supported by at least 15% of registered voters in that county. And Mr. Speaker, once you have satisfied that threshold, there will be a commission established by the President, but that commission will still have to be subjected to the Senate. So once you get 15% of registered voters, you submit it to the Senate. The Senate establishes a special committee. If the Senate agrees with you, it forwards the request to the National Assembly. If the National Assembly agrees with the Senate, then the President establishes a commission within 90 days. And if there was to be a decision on alteration, it must be supported by 2/3 of members of both houses. 2/3 of members of both houses is a threshold in the Constitution. But the question would still remain, even with 2/3 of members proposing the alteration of county boundaries, should it go to a referendum? And we'll be relying on the bright lights like Senator Cherarkei to put together Article 188 and Article 255 and advise whether we should amend this legislation further to make it mandatory for a referendum. Otherwise, Article 188, it ends at approval by 2/3, and then the boundaries are altered. There's the other question of creating new counties. How do you create new counties? Mr. Speaker, this bill does not address that subject, because for you to create new counties, you must go into a referendum to alter Article 16, is that Article 16? That defines Kenya as comprising of the 47 counties in the first schedule. For you to amend the first schedule, you must go into a referendum. So this bill only deals with boundary disputes and cases where there is need to alter the boundaries of existing counties. Mr. Speaker, the challenges with the District and Provinces Act which this bill seeks to repeal, is that the boundaries are described in a very narrative form in many cases. And there are very few counties where the boundaries are expressed in forms of GPS coordinates. And so this bill makes it mandatory for the Cabinet Secretary to maintain an electronic register using the latest advanced technologies to ensure that county boundaries are mapped and captured using GIS or GPS, the relevant technology, and it makes it an offense for anyone to alter those records. And that is captured in Clause 3 of the bill. The schedule that we have attached to this bill has been captured as is from the District and Provinces Act. And Mr. Speaker, a number of colleagues here have expressed their concern that that schedule, sometimes the way it has described those boundaries is a bit tricky. Unfortunately, we don't have any other point of reference, because when people went to Naivasha, they referred to the District and Provinces Act, and that then became part of the Supreme Law. And so if you go back and try to rewrite the District and Provinces Act, I can tell you you're going to end up in a lot of problems. And no Kenyan is going to accept that you move the existing boundaries even by a single inch. This bill, and even the alteration of boundaries, and even issues of mediation, must be subjected to serious public engagement. Mr. Speaker, even as I move, I'm still asking myself that if you've got a petition from County X, for example, Vihiga County, you have a petition from Vihiga, and Vihiga has moved Parliament to alter the boundary, how do you capture the voice of the people of Kisumu, assuming the boundary would be moving and carving Maseno to be part of Vihiga? Just as an example, I know Senator Osotsi is firmly convinced that Maseno is part of Vihiga. And we are entitled to our own opinions, but not to our own facts. Of course, the facts might look a bit different. But if the people of Vihiga initiate that motion, and they are able to convince Parliament that that boundary should be altered, how do you capture the voice of the people of Kisumu who feel like something is being taken away from them? And I'll be relying on my colleagues to advise on how some of these things can be done, so that by altering a boundary, you do not kill one county just to strengthen another county. Mr. Speaker, our greatest battle is to defend the territory of the Republic of Kenya. These county boundaries are superficial. And I want to implore Kenyans that we don't need to be killing each other over issues of boundaries around counties. The boundaries are not natural. The boundaries are not entirely cultural. The boundaries are not entirely historical. They were constructs of a government that perhaps sought to gerrymander to ensure that it had more administrative units that it could control. And Mr. Speaker, even though today we are talking about alteration of boundaries and mediation where there are boundary disputes, this House must take judicial notice. And on this, the leader of government business in this House must tell us the direction we are taking as a county vis-a-vis the structures of devolution. Because just the other day, I've had in my county the establishment of about 6 or 7 sub-counties. Now, the problem with these 6 or 7 sub-counties is that they then operate in competition with the structures of devolved governments. You have people wearing colonial era uniform, walking around, trying to police and to shepherd politicians who have been elected by the people. And I think that when people went to Naivasha, there was an agreement that the National Government Coordination Act would be aligned to the new constitution. And we are not seeing that happening. We are seeing the proliferation of sub-counties. We are seeing the proliferation of national government administrative units at the expense of the structures of devolved governments. We should be clear in our minds that we have got 2 levels of government, the national governments and county governments, and whereas the national government has a right to establish whatever units they deem appropriate along the principle of subsidiarity, but it should not be in competition with devolution. And it should not be a replication of existing devolved structures. And it should not be, waste of funds, because all these people, money is being spent on them. And Mr. Speaker, I've heard some of my colleagues argue that when you establish a sub-county, you are going to have a sub-county admin. If you establish a new location, you're going to have a chief, a sub-chief, and all those. And that is the attraction of all these things. But let us argue from the position of principle that we should have only two structures of government, the devolved governments and the national government. Mr. Speaker, I wish to conclude by thanking the Devolution Committee, led by Senator Abbas. Mr. Speaker, Senator Abbas, we had agreed was going to second this bill, but the committee did an excellent job. They have reported back to the House. The House is seized of their report, and we will take the proposed amendments that came from public participation to ensure that we make this bill better. Ultimately, the debate must be had whether we need 47 counties or less. And Mr. Speaker, for those of us who look at books of accounts on almost a daily basis, the 47 county governments are beginning to look like 47 payroll offices, because the bulk of what they do is to pay salaries and to chase for exchequer to be released. We must ask ourselves and have a candid conversation on the kind of economies of scale that we need to ensure that we have fewer counties that can synergize better. But before we get there, perhaps it's within our powers to come up with a law on regional economic blocks. We have regional economic blocks covering, I think in northern Kenya, the senator for Mandera spearheaded the formation of a regional economic block. The problem with regional economic blocks is that they have no legal form. So they cannot engage with an investor. They cannot even receive money from county governments, because the Public Accounts Committee cannot accept subscriptions or contributions to a regional economic block that has no legal form. So it's a very small amendment that we need to make to the law to allow the regional economic blocks to have some legal form, to allow them to be body corporates, to allow them to be entities or corporations of county government, so that they can be audited and they can receive resources from the respective counties. If we did that, that would be a halfway situation between the 47 counties and the desired number of counties. I still believe that the desired number of counties in Kenya should not exceed 13. I still believe, Mr. Speaker, that Nairobi City County should never be managed in the manner in which it is managed by politicians. Nairobi City County is not just a capital of Kenya. It is a capital of the United Nations, hosting the United Nations Environment Program, hosting the United Nations Habitat Program. We cannot be running Nairobi City County the way we are running Homa Bay Town. I didn't want to say Kakamega, but we cannot be running Nairobi the way we are running Kakamega. We cannot be running our cities, Nairobi, Mombasa, Kisumu, Nakuru, and now Eldoret, using the same template, the same rule, and the same laws that we are using to manage Migori City, and Tanzania. I still believe that that is a hard conversation that we must push. And leader of majority, I hope that you're going to revive your legislative proposal, which once you came to this house and convinced us that Nairobi should be managed differently. And I still admire your courage then, until the then governor for Nairobi accused you of doing some things with him in toilets, and then you disappeared. Mr. Speaker, with those remarks, I beg to move, and Senator Abbas was to second me. His absent Senator Sifuna was to second me. He says he left his notes in his car. Majority Leader, I pray that you be kind enough to second this bill, because it's a bipartisan bill, and Senator Osotsi is also keen on seconding, as long as he does not claim Maseno on the floor of this House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move.
Okay, Majority Leader, second the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to second this bill by Senator Moses Kajwang, a man who likes to keep his options as many as possible in many affairs in his life. That's why even in seconding, you can see how many people he has lined up to second this particular bill. Mr. Speaker, sir, this is an extremely important bill that has been through the corridors of this House for quite a long time. Yet it is an extremely important duty which we must carry out as a House of Parliament, and more specifically, Senate. Boundary disputes, Mr. Speaker, are not new in this House. And many afternoons we have spent here listening to petitioners pleading to Senate that please, can you manage for us this dispute between County X and County Y? Senator Moses Kajwang did mention the inter-county disputes, but he forgot that previously we have also received intra-county disputes as well, between certain regions of a particular county and the other. And Mr. Speaker, that is as if that is not enough. Even when you recently, Mr. Speaker, had the National Dialogue Committee, part of what engaged our precious time are many of such disputes. In fact, if you read the NADCO report, Mr. Speaker, Senate has been asked to particularly expedite this particular bill so as to try and reduce and ease the tensions that is simmering between many counties without and within of their boundaries for many reasons. But at the heart of it all, Mr. Speaker, is about resources. And therefore, this bill, Mr. Speaker, provides the legislative platform, Mr. Speaker, for us to be able to set up county boundaries, mechanisms for resolving, first of all, the disputes by setting in place what Senator Moses Kajwang and is referred in the bill as the primary level of Speaker, that we are proposing a mediation committee. We always speak of alternative dispute resolution as a way of resolving disputes, Mr. Speaker. But this is the very first time in an act of parliament we are proposing actually to establish in law mediation committees within our counties, Mr. Speaker, to look into issues that arise. And perhaps maybe later on, with the success or otherwise of this, we shall learn useful lessons of how to craft devolution-centered laws, Mr. Speaker, that will provide the opportunity for people when they disagree in our various counties, Mr. Speaker, to first seek to mediate within the county without even going outside of it, Mr. Speaker. For that is an important element of all the conversations we've had over the last few years, Mr. Speaker, with the judiciary. Many times you are told that there are many cases that are before our judges, Mr. Speaker, that ought not to be there in the first place, that if people had sat down over a cup of coffee or tea, Mr. Speaker, they will have reached an amicable resolution of. And therefore, I am particularly impressed by section 6 of the bill, Mr. Speaker, where we set up this mediation committee and the kind of people that are to chair the mediation committee, where the chairperson needs to be an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. I have raised times without number complaint on this appetite by our friends from the legal fraternity to reduce everything to be about legal dispute. If it was always about legal, Senator Catherine Muma, then we wouldn't be having the divisions we have in our courts and the failure to disagree. I am yet to meet two lawyers who agree on the same topic. They are the most opinionated of people, and therefore, yet many times, Mr. Speaker, when there are disputes, we suggest and say, let us have person having the experience. What is wrong, for example, in proposing having a senior accountant with 15 years experience in public affairs? They could sit down and resolve that particular dispute. Or somebody who has a prowess in conflict resolution, even if an elder in a society. But nonetheless, Mr. Speaker, I want to agree with this proposal because you do recognize, Mr. Speaker, that I am seconding the bill. And when you're seconding the bill, you move the bill as is. That is a practice that many people are yet to learn. That the mover and the seconder in their comments are restricted to the bill as is. Subsequently, members who are contributing, like now those who will arise to speak to this particular bill, Mr. Speaker, may choose to disagree with one or two provisions of the bill and what they think. But, Mr. Speaker, then there is a proposal to have a person from the affected counties, the commissioner from NLC, a surveyor. That is a profession now who is rightfully in place because boundaries are matters of survey. Mr. Speaker, a public officer who shall be nominated by the CS, who shall be secretary to the committee, but remember they are an ex officio and they do not vote. A person does not qualify, Mr. Speaker, to be appointed to this committee if they have stood for elective office in the effective counties the last 5 years, just like we do with IEBC, Mr. Speaker, because chances are they will have interest in that particular bill, that particular challenge or dispute, Mr. Speaker, or somebody who has been found guilty of professional misconduct. Various, Mr. Speaker, subsequent provisions, and therefore you set up a mediation committee each time when this such a petition is presented before us, of course, and it provides for how to pay for them. And this mediation committee, Mr. Speaker, is not just a baraza for people to sit. They actually have powers as per section 12 of the act or the bill as proposed, Mr. Speaker. They have the powers of the High Court. Number one, they can summon witnesses. Number two, they can call for the production of books, plans and documents. And they can even they can examine witnesses on oath, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, this is not an ordinary committee. They have almost equal powers to that of us as members of parliament, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, their work and going about their dispute, how they can resolve these particular challenges cannot be gainsaid. Perhaps Senator Moses Kajwang, it will benefit our colleagues to know that because of the mediation committee, some of the very famous disputes that we have just quoted, the Sondu issue that has stuck with us for so long, Maseno between Vihiga and Kisumu, Mtito Andei between Makueni and Taita Taveta, Mr. Speaker, that they don't even have to subsequently result in the subsequent provisions of the bill. The mediation committee having been set up and Parliament having been moved by a petitioner to this House and setting in place this particular mediation committee can actually resolve some of these boundary disputes. Therefore, you may not even necessarily have to result into altering or finding ways. There are ways in which we can compensate each other as neighboring committee. Many times, Mr. Speaker, I have been to Sondu, for example, and listened to elders from both Kisumu and Kericho side. What separates them is not extremely difficult to the point that the mediation committee has set up in this particular bill may not be able to resolve, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, this is a wise move and a good proposal to have a mediation committee so that we don't have to fix everything. It will be impossible, Mr. Speaker, to imagine that we can get to a point in time where we will draw the boundaries so accurately that there will never be conflict. So long as you are neighbors, Mr. Speaker, you'll never disagree about boundaries. If you think about it, it's just as good as those of us that come from densely populated communities. Between you and your neighbor, I don't know anybody who has a neighbor that they either don't quarrel over a bull that keeps on crossing the fence and invades the maize fields of their neighbor, or somebody that has planted the tree on the wrong part of the field, a fence that is wrongly placed. The same is expected of our county governments, Mr. Speaker, and therefore to set in place a mediation committee that features proposals from both counties, Mr. Speaker, to meet and try and resolve this particular process in an amicable way is a genius move, Mr. Speaker, and therefore I agree with the provisions of the bill. Further to it, Mr. Speaker, is the process of the alteration of boundaries of our counties, Mr. Speaker, a very difficult exercise. Why do I say difficult? Difficult because of the provisions of Section 188(2). If today, even if we went to all the rigors of this particular bill, Mr. Speaker, we must remember that eventually that report to alter a county boundary must come before the floor of both houses. And must not just come, it must be passed by 2/3. In the three terms that have been in this House, Mr. Speaker, there is nothing that has raised 2/3. Maybe only the impeachment of Deputy Speaker Kithure Kindiki, where people were mobilized, Mr. Speaker, some from hospital beds, to come and execute very dirty work, Mr. Speaker, on the floor of this Deputy Speaker Kithure Kindiki. Apart from that, Mr. Speaker, there has never been, and you know Senate's threshold is easier to achieve because it's only 45 out of 67. Now imagine the National Assembly, out of 349 members, Mr. Speaker, to get 2/3 of that particular, almost 230 something, 34, 35, Mr. Speaker, to be convinced and balance all the interest and, you know, all the political play that come into it, Mr. Speaker, is not an easy exercise, Mr. Speaker. Why is that a genius provision? It's a genius provision, Mr. Speaker, because of gerrymandering, that a political party that has strength, Mr. Speaker, not even a president, Mr. Speaker, can sit down and alter the boundary of a county to fit certain political, partisan political interests, Mr. Speaker, and have Parliament just rubber stamp it, Mr. Speaker. It will take a lot of negotiations, Mr. Speaker. It is akin to the magical 24 number, Mr. Speaker. Many of those that haven't been able to live through this house in the formula passing processes, Mr. Speaker, will enjoy and appreciate the genius of the magical 24 delegation next year when you commence the process of discussing the 5th generation formula, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, this process as proposed, Mr. Speaker, in this particular part 4 of the bill, Mr. Speaker, on trying to establish what are the considerations, Mr. Speaker, of altering county boundaries that takes into consideration physical and human infrastructure, historical ties, cost of administration, and so on and so forth, Mr. Speaker, that it won't just be as easy as people imagine, Mr. Speaker, that once a process has gone through the independent commission that is being set up, Mr. Speaker, Parliament will have the eventual vote of how this exercise is done. Hence, the importance of the earlier point that I mentioned, Mr. Speaker, about the need for a mediation committee, because it is important for people to know, even as they mediate, that failure to the mediation exercise, then they will be stuck with the problem, because like I have mentioned, it will not be easy, Mr. Speaker. For a county boundary to be altered, then it must pass the test of scrutiny of both the majority and the minority side in both houses of Parliament, or at least, Mr. Speaker, a significant portion of both sides, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate that particular provision, Mr. Speaker. The Speaker of the Senate, Mr. Speaker, is an interesting player, because within 7 days of a reception of a petition under Section 17, it will be important to point out, Mr. Speaker, what Section 17 is about. Section 17 of this bill is about Parliament being petitioned to alter a county boundary. And the people who can petition Parliament includes any person who is a registered voter, the senator of that particular county, the member of the National Assembly representing a constituency within the county, and a county governor on behalf of the county government. When that petition is presented to the Senate, Mr. Speaker, the Speaker of the Senate shall have 7 days, Mr. Speaker, to report the report of the petition, then refer the petition to a special committee of the Senate established to consider the petition. We will set up a committee to actually look into that particular petition. Then that petition shall be referred to the special committee of the Senate, which shall have only 30 days. Mr. Speaker, normal petitions have 60 days. But because we appreciate, Mr. Speaker, the importance and the difficulties issues of boundaries are to our communities, Mr. Speaker, we have set in this law that within 30 days, that special committee must conclude its work and report to the House. And when they report to the House, Mr. Speaker, of course, they recommend to the Senate. They may recommend that the boundary be referred to a mediation committee. Remember what you have established earlier in Section 5, Mr. Speaker, or establishment of a commission in terms of Section 23, which we shall be speaking to. The Senate does not recommend the establishment of the commission. If the special committee makes a recommendation under A, then the Senate shall within 7 days consider the recommendation of a special committee, a further special committee, to look into that particular. No further proceedings shall take place with regards to that particular petition, if no further proceedings. Then Section 23, Mr. Speaker, the process is the same also. This process actually commences in the Senate, but it goes all the way to the Assembly. It is important for members to know that the place to set up a petition for county boundaries is here in the Senate. But once we are dispensed off with the matter, it goes to our colleagues in the lower house, Mr. Speaker. And the National Assembly, Mr. Speaker, must concur with the resolution of the Senate for the establishment of a commission, and therefore the commission is established in accordance to Section 23, or does not concur with the resolution of Senate for the establishment of the commission, then the petition shall be referred to a mediation committee in accordance with Article 115, the same way that all bills and, that comes from this House, when members of the Assembly do not agree with us. If the Assembly fails to consider resolution within a specified time, the National Assembly is deemed to have approved the resolution. I wish we can put this particular provision in many of the bills, Mr. Speaker, that we send to the National Assembly. Then by sheer luck or whatever means, Mr. Speaker, they fail to read it and it's signed into law. So that the many bills that members complain that they have sent a particular bill, it has taken X number of months, it hasn't been considered by Assembly, it takes effect and becomes law, Mr. Speaker. So if they, that is if they choose not to consider that particular. But when they pass the resolution, Mr. Speaker, then the Speaker of the Senate shall, within 7 days of the approval by the National, submit the resolution to the President for the establishment of the Commission in accordance with Section 23. What is this Section 23, Mr. Speaker, that is being mentioned so prominently, Mr. Speaker, in this particular act? And this is part of not very fluent legislative drafting. This is a conversation you can have about legislative drafting. To have, I know Director Mogere is a good drafter as well, draftsman. But sometimes we have challenges in how we do our bills. You refer to certain sections before you eventually get to them. You find Section 23 being referred to as an eventual solution to an item that is in sections previously to it. Maybe we need to think about how to clean up in future when you're making such laws. Anyway, Mr. Speaker, the point is this: what is Section 23 of this particular bill? Section 23 of this particular bill is, and Part 5, Mr. Speaker, is when Parliament has been moved under Section 22. Remember the earlier provisions of Section 22. Then an independent county boundaries commission is established, and the President shall, within 14 days of the reception of the petition, nominate members of a committee in accordance with this part. So it's a setting up of what is known as Independent County Boundaries Commission. An independent commission, Mr. Speaker, that the membership is listed there. Person from IBC, one person from NLC, principal secretary for matters related to land and physical planning, 2 persons of the opposite gender who are not residents of the affected counties, nominated by COG. Mr. Speaker, a person who is a surveyor, a practicing advocate who has experience of more than 15 years, who shall be nominated by LSK, Mr. Speaker, and then a secretary commission to the commission who shall be an ex officio. Once that committee is set up, Mr. Speaker, then they will look into all those issues. Remember what you had raised. They have the powers to call, Mr. Speaker, then it's listed what are the qualifications to be a member of a commission. And Mr. Speaker, is listed. The functions of the commissions are listed, which is to make appropriate recommendations in accordance with Article 188. Then the commission also, according to Section 27, shall have all the powers that I had previously mentioned, Mr. Speaker, that they feature in a mediation committee. Finally, Mr. Speaker, when this committee has recommended whatever the report and the findings back to Parliament, Mr. Speaker, every officer of the or institution or national county shall accord such assistance. No, that's not the part that I needed. Mr. Speaker, I wanted to mention, Mr. Speaker, Section 28, that the conduct of the regulation of affairs of the Commission shall be provided in the 4th schedule. Thereto, the Commission may regulate its own provision. Then, Mr. Speaker, of course, the Commission is expected to observe the principles of impartiality, rules of natural justice, and all the other subsequent provisions, Mr. Speaker. After they have presented their report, of course, Mr. Speaker, the committee shall stand dissolved within 1 month, Mr. Speaker. The chairperson shall, before assuming office, subscribe to the oath of office under the 5th schedule. I just wanted to point out to members, under the 4th schedule of the bill, Mr. Speaker, on the conduct of business by the Commission, that it shall be through minutes, interest needs to be declared. A person who contravenes all this, there is even set out the quorum for conduct of the business shall be at least 3 members of the Commission. The chairperson shall preside. Mr. Speaker, if there is no unanimity in a particular subject, it shall be by vote. Therefore, it's a well thought out, Mr. Speaker, commission. They have provided the procedure also in the bill on the second schedule of how to petition Parliament, that it can be handwritten, Mr. Speaker, printed or typed, you know, English or Swahili, free alteration in line. It shall be addressed to the Senate, Mr. Speaker, and so on and so forth. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, this is a very important exercise that we need to complete this particular issue so that we can conclude. There are various counties that are listed there, all the 47 counties, Mr. Speaker, touching where they commence, you know, and all the features of that particular. You can read, members, all the particular and listed. Section 36 is on Bomet County, 35 is on Kericho, Mr. Speaker, together with the geographical location, and the degrees 32, Nakuru, and so on and so forth. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I want to urge members to support this particular bill because it shall help us in resolving one of the challenges that our devolved units continue to face, Mr. Speaker. I believe after which we can embark on even more difficult issues such as what was raised by Senator Moses Kajwang. And I think I raised this, it may not have been in the House at that particular time, that in this particular session, during my first speech to the House, Mr. Speaker, when we resumed this session, that as a House we must address ourselves to the rising cost of running county governments, where counties are almost getting to almost 50% on the current, over and above 50% on just salaries alone, Mr. Speaker. I've seen counties that are as high as 47% just on salaries of all the devolved funds. We need to rename. If your governor is spending upwards of such numbers, they need to stop referring to them as governors. We need to call them paymaster generals, because that's ideally that is what they are. They are not running a county government. They are simply HR payroll masters, Mr. Speaker. Therefore, this is a conversation that we need to have. Of course, the defense of many county governments when they appear before Senator Kajwang and when they appear before BPS is that what do you want us to do? We have health workers and the demand for it, of course, justified to a greater extent. But also what they do not disclose, Senator Kajwang, is how many members of staff are being paid outside of the IPPPRS. A significant number. Many governors are setting what you would consider as small gangs in the name of young people. They're big to, oh, kazi kwa vijana and all these things, and not being carried out through a competitive process, Mr. Speaker. MCAs are being told, get me 50 people per ward. These people are supposed to clean drainages. Yet these are the people that accompany governors to funerals and weddings. And if the senator like Kajwang tries to say anything or disagree with the county governor of Homa Bay, Mr. Speaker, then they are quickly escorted out of the function. With this particular young man, Mr. Speaker. Those are the people that are goggling up more than 50%. Yes, the green. I am told there is one called Green Army in Sifudas County, Mr. Speaker. And so many, Mr. Speaker. I'm told they all originate from the famous Men in Black from Sifunas Party. That's where the inspiration came from, Mr. Speaker. So many governors have learned this. But we need to have that conversation so that we go through item by item on who are these people and what is a necessity, Mr. Speaker. An institution must have an optimum establishment, Mr. Speaker, because there are many officers that you find in our county government officers whose duties are not properly defined. Therefore, it is the duty of that particular county governor to rationalize their personnel so that you make a bold decision and say, I have decided from today that we are not continue to hiring on this particular department. We can transfer, encourage even staffers to go back to school and learn new professions, Mr. Speaker, so that they can get better employment opportunities in the county. That is a conversation that we need to have, Senator Moses Kajwang and us entirely as a counter. But for now, Mr. Speaker, with those very many remarks, I beg to second this particular bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Majority Leader. Honorable Senators, I propose the question that the County Boundaries Bill, Senate Bills number 6 of 2023, be now read a second time. Let's start with Senator Mugatana Danson.
Mr. Speaker, I want to first of all congratulate the Honorable Senator Kajwang for bringing this bill to the House. And I thank the Majority Leader for a very elaborate speech that he gave in seconding this bill. Mr. Speaker, I want to locate the problem and the practical question that is there in Tana River County. Mr. Speaker, all our borders, all our boundaries with our neighbors, with the exception of Tharaka Nithi, all the other places, we are having issues with our neighbors. Mr. Speaker, Kilifi County has kept on encroaching on Tana River County. Mr. Speaker, Garissa County has kept on encroaching on Tana River County. When we were young, we knew that the boundaries are on this side. Now we are old, we are told the boundaries has shifted, and our county revenue collection officers are being told to move inside Tana River County. Mr. Speaker, Kitui County, in fact, we have had a very serious conflict with Kitui County. Mr. Speaker, houses have been burnt. Police stations have been burnt, Mr. Speaker. Places where voting used to take place for Tana River County, people have been moved. Schools, Mr. Speaker, on this side of Bura constituency, they have been pushed away, Mr. Speaker, ostensibly because it is the region of Kitui County. The problem has been so serious, Mr. Speaker, that our people were almost picking up arms, and we had to, many of us go there to try and resolve the problem, cool down tensions. Eventually, the minister himself, Cabinet Secretary Kindiki, had to come so that he can give assurance that the issues will be resolved. Mr. Speaker, the regional commissioners for Eastern Province, former Eastern Province, the RC for Tana River, the RC for Garissa, they all held a meeting at the RC on this other side for the Coast Province. Mr. Speaker, they held a meeting and tried to resolve, but still the tensions continue to date. So, Mr. Speaker, we are dealing with a real serious matter here, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when you look at the provisions that have been mentioned, and I don't want to go into close by close, but Mr. Speaker, some of the biggest omissions that have opened in this law is that we have set up a mediation committee, yes, Mr. Speaker, but we have not set up the powers of this mediation committee, Mr. Speaker. What is it that they can give? Because if you are a mediator, Mr. Speaker, you have to be given power. That do you have power to compensate for loss? For example, Mr. Speaker, in Tana River, lives have been lost when these conflicts have occurred. People have come with bows and arrows. People have died, Mr. Speaker. So this mediation committee, does it have power to compensate, to order compensation, Mr. Speaker? And where there is agreement that you have encroached on the original boundaries of Tana River County, are we going to be paid, Mr. Speaker, for the schools that were burnt down in the area of Kalalani, Mr. Speaker? Are we going to be paid? So, Mr. Speaker, this law has left a huge gap in terms of what are the powers of this mediating committee. Mr. Speaker, these are the things that we need to set up so clearly so that the people we represent can feel appreciated. They can feel that actually we are passing a law that is going to serve them. Mr. Speaker, today, if you tell people that to change this boundary, you need to come to Senate and get 2/3 majority. You need to go to National Assembly and get 2/3 majority. You are simply telling them these boundaries will never be changed. And Mr. Speaker, if that is what we are saying, let us say it in the bill. Let us say the way it is. We say that the District and Provinces Act of 1992 is not going to change. So what we are going to change are compensatory mechanisms. So that, Mr. Speaker, let us put our heads together. We are a lot of clever people in this Senate, Mr. Speaker. For everyone to sit here, Mr. Speaker, if we apply our minds, we applied our minds to get ourselves here, and by the grace of God, we are all here. I am sure, Mr. Speaker, we can crack the problem. The problem, Mr. Speaker, as it has been mentioned, is revenue collection. So can we agree? Can we agree that the boundaries are what was there, but the revenue collection for these cities that are in the borders, let us share 50-50, 60-40, and for those who have lost, Mr. Speaker, compensation mechanism must be created so that the people of Tana River, Mr. Speaker, when this bill passes, they are able to say, look, there is a law now, I can go to that committee, and that committee will give me back my house, will give me back my shamba, will give me back the school that was built and was burnt down by CDF money, Mr. Speaker. So I think there is a huge gap, Mr. Speaker. The other power, Mr. Speaker, is to be able to return, to redefine the areas or to make it clear. Mr. Speaker, the Cabinet Secretary, the relevant Cabinet Secretary has been given power to put electronic marks to define these boundaries. Mr. Speaker, when the mover was moving this bill, he said that some of the boundaries have been set up using physical marks. Like now, people in this bill are talking about River Tana and how it is moving. Now, Mr. Speaker, if you say that the boundaries between Garissa town and River Tana and Tana River is 3 kilometers away from the river, this river changes, Mr. Speaker. When it is flooding, it goes this way. When it is not flooding, it goes the other way. So what is the boundary, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, if you look at the bill, there are some counties, boundaries that have been done so well, but in some places they just casually talk about the river, you know, a hill somewhere, Mr. Speaker. Hills, they change, Mr. Speaker. We cannot be talking in those old days. So this particular provision, Mr. Speaker, we've got to have a very clear scientific demarcation of these boundaries using modern technology, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, it will help if our own county surveyors are involved in that process of demarcation. Because, Mr. Speaker, if the surveyors from Nairobi are going to come and they're going to say, no, we are supposed to follow the river. So if the river used to go this course earlier on, the locals and the local surveyor and the local people here will be able to tell you this is the original course of the river. So don't try to go left, don't try to go to the right. Mr. Speaker, it will be useful to add into that provision of saying the minister will keep electronic records, to say that to enrich that provision and say that there must be a process where the county surveyors are involved with the national survey to demarcate the boundaries clearly so that it is electronic and it is standardized. So that at the back of the act, we are very clearly able to say it is these demarcations, these points that define the counties as they are. Mr. Speaker, I wanted to also say that attacks have been made here and suggestions have been made that we should not, why are we always going to lawyers? For example, the lawyer that is supposed to chair this mediation committee. Mr. Speaker, we have nothing against, as an advocate or a lawyer, I have nothing against a mathematics professor sitting on this whatever. I have nothing against a doctor of law, a doctor of medicine sitting on this. But Mr. Speaker, we have to accept that the business of lawyers is very wide. They are always accepting disputes from a very, very wide range of disputes that arise, and that is the business that we have been trained in. So when you put a lawyer to make a decision, you are putting a person who is in his space. But if you take a doctor who has been running a clinic for the last 20 years and you tell him a dispute boundary, Mr. Speaker, I have a brother of mine who sometimes I talk to, he's a doctor, and I talk to him, I tell him, would you consider public service? He says, I would never in my life want to go and deal with crowds like you do. Why? Because I want to deal with you one-on-one. When I see you, you see me. Not all those crowds, all those. And I take your blood sample, I go and measure it in the lab, and they will give me the results, and I will treat you. Now, most medical people, maybe with the exception of people like Boni Khalwale, but most medical people think in a very straight line, Mr. Speaker, very clear. Most scientific oriented people think in a very straight line, very clear. 1 + 1 is 2 if you are using base 10, unless you change the base. So, Mr. Speaker, when we say an advocate of the High Court should sit to chair this committee, I don't think we should make a big issue. When we say members of the Law Society should be nominated into these boards, they are very, very helpful. And I don't want us to prejudice our profession, because our profession has seen its good days and its bad days. Mr. Speaker, it was not the people in the research scientists who are out in the streets during the dark days of oppression. Mr. Speaker, it was the lawyers who went to they were receiving those problems from everybody, and they said, let us go and make change. And this country became better because of the contribution that people did. Mr. Speaker, I wanted to also say this. These boundaries that we are talking about, Mr. Speaker, the boundaries that have been created, as we said, and I want to really emphasize this, Mr. Speaker, we must come up with powers allocated to the mediation committee. What is it mediating? What kind of disputes can it mediate? What are the powers that it has for it to make resolution of disputes that are coming before it? And are we going to allocate the same powers as the powers of the High Court? What is the ruling, the effect of the ruling of this mediation committee, Mr. Speaker? And Mr. Speaker, let us also be honest to ourselves. Let us not tell Kenyans we are going to change these boundaries, because it's not going to happen, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, 2/3 in National Assembly, and then come 2/3 in the Senate, Mr. Speaker, it will be a magical thing for that to happen. It is almost like a constitutional change. And Mr. Speaker, already we have the question, or even if we pass it, even if that magic is it really possible to change the boundaries of a county, and yet at the same time not change the structure of the definition of what the county, the territory of Kenya should look like? So, Mr. Speaker, I think it is honest of us to say county boundaries are not going to change. What we need to do is to agree on compensatory mechanisms. What we need to do is to craft a bill that is going to give powers to the ad hoc committees that will be set up to agree to share. If it is, the question is revenue, let us agree to share revenue. This county X, county Y can agree to share revenue. Mr. Speaker, the question of trying to create territories within Kenya, these artificial territories, it will create a lot of tension amongst our people. If county X, like Kitui County and Tana River County, if we know that the only thing that the boundaries isn't going to change, but you people, we have created a town around here. You collect 50% and we collect 50%. Then, Mr. Speaker, the people of Kitui, the people of Tana River, we live like brothers and sisters, the way it was intended by God. Let us not give false hope that people are going to shift boundaries. Mr. Speaker, I beg to support. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Senator Moruma Jones.
Asante Mheshimiwa Spika kwa kunipa hii fursa ili kuchangia huu mswada wa County Boundaries Bill. Mheshimiwa Spika, si mara ya kwanza huu mswada kuja huku. Ulikuwa katika bunge lililopita, lakini huu mswada ulipata maafa katika bunge la kitaifa na haukupita kuwa sheria. Mheshimiwa Spika, nianze na pale Mheshimiwa Mungatana alipomalizia ya kwamba tusidanganyane ya kwamba haiwezekani kubadilisha mipaka. Ibara ya 188 article 188 inasema kwamba inawezekana kubadilisha mipaka ya county. Kwa hivyo yeye kama mwanasheria, na nafikiri walihusika moja kwa moja wanasheria kuandika katiba, sionelei ni vipi kwamba kipengee kilijipata katika katiba ya kwamba mipaka ya county inaweza kubadilishwa, na yeye anasema tusidanganyane kwamba haiwezekani. Inawezekana, Mheshimiwa Spika. Mheshimiwa Spika, huu mswada kwa jimbo langu la Taita Taveta ni mswada wa muhimu sana, kwa sababu vile wasemaji wengine wamesema, tumepata changamoto na kaunti 3 za mipaka, ikiwemo kaunti ya Kwale pale Macnan Road, kaunti ya Makueni pale Mtitwandei, na kaunti ya Kajiado kule Rombo. Na Mheshimiwa Spika, wale watu wa Taita Taveta wanasikia wamefinyika, hasa wale wazee ambao wanasema nyinyi tumewachagua viongozi, lakini mnaacha mashamba yetu yanaenda, sijui watoto wenu watakuja kuishi wapi. Kwa hivyo Mheshimiwa Spika, nimshukuru Mheshimiwa Kajwang, Senator wa Homa Bay, kwa kuleta tena huu mswada kwa hii nyumba, kwa sababu ukipita utapea uhai ibara ya 188 ambayo inaangazia mambo ya kuangalia mipaka ya counties. Mipaka ya counties ambayo tunaijua kwa sasa iko katika sheria ya mikoa na wilaya ya mwaka wa 1992 ama District and Provinces Act ya 1992. Mheshimiwa Spika, vile mipaka ilivyoelezwa, imeelezwa ikitumia Mheshimiwa Spika, vipengee vya kimwili ama physical features ambazo ni barabara, mito na kadhalika. Na vile wasemaji wengine wamesema ni kwamba hivi vipengee vya kimwili vinavyoashiria mipaka vinabadilika. Mito inabadilisha mkondo, barabara ambayo zilikuwa zinatumika kuelezea mipaka, kwa mfano barabara ya Maram ambayo ilipita upande huu, barabara za Maram zimekuwa nyingi Mheshimiwa Spika, kwa sababu ya kujenga barabara na kuweka lami barabara. Kwa hivyo Mheshimiwa Spika, ni vyema tuunge mkono huu mswada ambao uko katika hii nyumba, na pia tutumie njia yoyote wakati huu mswada utakapoenda katika bunge la kitaifa kusaidia ili upite na uwe sheria, ili kusaidia kubadilisha hii mipaka ama kulainisha hii mipaka yetu. Mheshimiwa Spika, ukienda katika jimbo la Taita Taveta, ukienda maeneo kama Macnan Road, Mheshimiwa Spika, inasemekana Macnan Road iko ndani ya Kwale, lakini ukiangalia shule ya Mbele Secondary kwa mfano, tayari walimu wanatoka Taita Taveta, imejengwa na CDF ya Voi, lakini unasikia iko Macnan Road. Kwa hivyo mswada kama huu Mheshimiwa Spika, ukipita utapelekea kulainisha hizo tofauti ambazo tayari ziko kule Ukiangalia katika mpaka wa Taita Taveta na Kajiado, leo niliangalia TV kwa taarifa ya Sanani, watu wa upande wa Kajiado wakiandamana wakisema ya kwamba kuna shida ya mpaka. Na Taita Taveta pia tumelalamika kwa sababu gavana wa Kajiado na gavana wa Taita Taveta walishirikiana na wakapeana maelfu ya shamba ambayo ilikuwa ya Taita Taveta kwa watu wa Kajiado. Sasa ukiangalia huu mswada unaangazia mbinu na njia za kuhakikisha kwamba pale kuna utata wa mipaka, basi Mheshimiwa Spika, haya mambo yanasawazishwa. Mheshimiwa Spika, shida za mipaka zimepelekea utovu ama kudorora kwa usalama Mheshimiwa Spika. Na shida ya mipaka si Taita Taveta peke yake, lakini kuna shida ya mipaka kati ya Meru na Isiolo, Kisumu, Kericho na kadhalika Mheshimiwa Spika. Hata nimeona watu ambao wanaonekana kama ni watu wamoja wa Kisii na Nyamira ambao wanaongea lugha na wanaelewana, bado kuna shida ya mipaka, Mheshimiwa Spika. Kwa hivyo kama kutasuluhishwa utovu wa usalama ama kudorora kwa usalama katika nchi yetu ya Kenya, ni vyema huu mswada uungwe mkono na upite, Mheshimiwa Spika, ili kusuluhisha haya maswala. Na swala ambalo ni nyeti pia, Mheshimiwa Spika, ni kwa sababu ya hii tunaita on source revenue, kwa sababu saizi counties nahimizwa zikusanye ushuru, na ushuru mwingine ni hii on source revenue ambayo ni business permits, market charges na kadhalika, Mheshimiwa Spika. Kwa hivyo kupigana kati ya county mbili tofauti ni kwa sababu county inaona ya kwamba sisi tumeleta majengo na tuna biashara zinaendelea, lakini hatupati ushuru. Kwa hivyo katika kutengeneza hii kamati ya uwiano ama tume ya kuangalia mambo ya mipaka, mambo kadha wa kadha yamelainishwa na nafikiri wasemaji wengine wameangalia. Katika ibara ya 188 haikuelezewa ni vipi hii tume itatengenezwa, lakini katika hii sheria ambayo ni County Boundaries Bill, moja kwa moja, Mheshimiwa Speaker, maelezo yako ya kwa mfano sifa ama qualifications za commissioners ama hao watu wa tume itakaa namna gani. Kwa hivyo Mheshimiwa Speaker, mimi moja kwa moja naunga mkono, na ningependa kuambia wengine ambao watachangia mjadala ama mswada waunge pia mkono, kwa sababu Mheshimiwa Speaker utapelekea kusaidia kaunti zetu kuendelea mbele. Mheshimiwa Speaker, ni yangu tu hayo kwa sasa. Asante
sana. Next is Senator Boni Karware.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to contribute to this bill, and in the spirit of the mover, Senator Kajwang', and the contribution of the Senator of Tana River, Mungatana, this is a great bill because it is thought-provoking. I heard the mover get provoked. He started talking about 13 counties. Then I said, this is it. He's provoked. But quickly, you ran away. You even wanted to apologize for the remarks about Kakamega, yet you were right. I saw, Mr. Speaker, Senator Mungatana get provoked when he said candidly that unless you're going to do it from a different platform, if you expect to change boundaries using political statements from the National Assembly in Nairobi and the Senate in Nairobi, the Turkana will not listen to you. The people of Luandeti market, they'll wonder what is wrong with Khalwar to imagine that he can change our boundary. He got provoked. And I want to tell you, I want to contribute on that journey of thought-provoking. And if that is the case, colleagues, I want to beg you, today we are here, tomorrow we will not be here, we will be replaced by young people, and if God will have blessed us with a long life, we'll be sitting back and enjoying young people building on our foundation. Bill should be stood down because it might pass here, it flop in the Senate. It might flop in the National Assembly. We should stand it down and get a better fix. The better fix is we should go back to the people. We go to the people with a constitution amendment bill with the following intention, Madam Speaker. Namely, that we have all lived devolution today. And we know that all our 47 counties, except just a few, are actually employment bureaus. There is nothing governors are doing. In fact, and with due respect to the Senator of Vihiga, when I look at the development budget of Vihiga County, I wonder, how would you blame the governor for not doing flagship projects. Where will he get the money from? When I look at the budget of Lamu, the budget of Isiolo, the budget of Tarakaniti, the budget of Tana River, name them, and Nandi, they will never do development. They'll just give employments to people to massage the egos of politicians that I have employed so many youth and that kind of nonsense, and that will not fix that which we wanted devolution to do. I propose that we amend the Constitution of Kenya to reduce counties by 1, removing Nairobi from being referred to as a county. Nairobi is the Commonwealth, the unifying factor, the capital city of the Republic of Kenya. If you go to the United States of America, where we have 52 states, we have a place called Washington, D.C., where they have put their monuments, their museums, the center of power, the seat of power. Capitol Hill is in Washington, D.C. This is what we should let Nairobi be. I know the distinguished senator of Nairobi will not run out of a job because he can win in many other counties in this country, which I don't want to point to because I can come under attack. We remove Nairobi from our list of counties. Then number 2, we amalgamate the regional counties that have been speaking to it. This endeavor by governors to go into regional blocks was not knee-jerk. They had reflected that if they went into a regional block, then they will unlock the regional economic potential. So, I'm appealing to the people of the counties of the former Western Province to accept that we have County 1, Western County, County 2, Nyanza County, County 3, North Rift County, County 4, South Rift County, County 5, Central County, County 6, Northeastern County, County 7, Upper Eastern, County 8, Lower Eastern, and County 9, the last, Coast. What is the benefit behind this thinking? And I said, it is a thought-provoking discussion this afternoon. I just want to flow. I don't have to be right, but I would like you to be heard by this House. I believe we will be moving on the trajectory of looking for the ideal county. What is this ideal county that you would be looking for? In an ideal county, we want a county that is economically viable. Senator Kajwang, as the father of this motion, you can imagine the viability of Nyanza province with their counties touching the Lake Victoria, the tourism, the blue economy, the water sports, the ships that can move not only from county to county, but that can move from the port in Kisumu, go to Entebbe, go to Mwanza. You will unlock that potential instead of looking at the smaller picture, Madam Speaker. Number 2, these economically viable counties will generate on-source revenue. I know of a county, I will not say its name, because the senator will be offended. Thank God it's not in the House. On-source revenue, they raise about 200 million on-source revenue. And the shareable revenue, Senator Kajwang, father of this bill, that county gets over 12 billion shillings. So this is a county whereby, even if you give them 10 years, their focus is on shareable revenue without caring where that commonwealth is coming from. They will not be bothered to try and grow their own source revenue. They have got an easy source of 12 billion. Why struggle to raise the 200 million? We learn from on source revenue the successes of the bigger counties. And senators, you can look at the statistics. Now they're there. We are in the 11th years of devolution. Nairobi has contributed to on-source revenue in billions. Machakos in billions. Kakamega in billions. Kiambu in billions. Nakuru in billions. Why? Because they are big counties. There is wisdom in us amalgamating our counties. Number 3, when you unlock the economic potential in regions, you fix the problem in Maseno. You fix the problem in Mutitandei. You fix the problem between the Pokomos and the Kambas who keep on moving the boundary, and the people from Kilifi who are doing the same, the Pokomos. How do you fix it? Because they'll naturally be found in one huge county, and therefore ethnic friction will go down. 2, ethnic chauvinism will not be there, because the people in the huge county are most unlikely to be monoethnic. And therefore, they learn, Madam Speaker, to live with each other and use the human resource from the various mosaics of their tribes to grow their county. Madam Speaker, these huge counties will also promote national cohesion. The reason why you hear so much push for affirmative action, because ethnic group A feels they are marginalized and so on and so forth, it is because the dream of the 15 heroes who spoke in this house in 1963, when Jomo Kenyatta was being sworn in as Prime Minister, the dream they had of a nation, now devolution is diluting that dream. And that's why today, Madam Speaker, there is competition for ethnic chiefs, ethnic kingpins, because somebody wants to feel that he is the king of, for example, that little ethnic community, because he has no national appeal at all. I was thinking about some national leaders today when the president was addressing the House. And I was wondering, this guy who is loading it on everybody around here, if you took him to a market in Homa Bay and just let him alight from a matatu in a t-shirt, clean, expensive, and walk around, many people will start asking, who is that fellow? And yet he's the fellow who is claiming that he wants to load it on all of us because he has no national appeal. When you have national appeal, you don't have to go and fight for an ethnic fiefdom. Madam Speaker, my last point is dealing with corruption. If our counties are big in size and few in number, the village millionaires you are seeing these days, they'll go down. Because what happens is that when you go to Kisii County, the governor, because he comes from this clan or this sub-tribe, he helps friends and relatives from his family. So you see little, these days we have a lot of rich village millionaires back home. Some of them not very well educated. And because thanks to the corruption in the county, he fixes this road and fixes the other one, he has gotten money, he has no respect for human resource. For God's sake, human resource is found in highly trained people. That's what you call the most productive human resource. Because for every job the engineer has for himself, that job supports very many other jobs below him, and that means he grows the human resource capital. I'm going to give it a shot after this bill fails, because fail it will. I'll give it a shot and bring a constitutional amendment bill so that we send the country to a referendum. You know, when the oversight fund came, you saw we were not in agreement because we were being unfair. Those of us who come from huge counties, what we were given in the first quarter that we got, we did things because the money is reasonable. But what you gave a smaller county, probably all they did, they might have done training of the people who he wants to employ in the oversight structure. Let us think big. Let us think national. Let us move the country forward to kill ethnic chauvinism, to promote opportunities that, Madam Speaker, will create jobs for our children. God has blessed me with a number of children, and each one of them, I have time for them. And I found they share something in common, and that is that this craze that older people have for land where you want to go and grow maize or you want to go and grow cotton and whatever it is, our youth are not in it. Our youth are now wired differently, and therefore let us use shareable revenue to ensure that we grow our economy, grow our opportunities, and fix our unemployment. Finally, but not least, colleagues, the minister was here last week, and he told us, go and ensure that governors have opened at least 4 strategic centers in each ward in your county so that the government can deliver and secure affordable fertilizer. He told us. Oh, you will not believe what is happening in some of the counties, Kakamega included. They have refused to open those strategic positions. Instead, they have gone into competition with the national government because they have found a business opportunity. What are they doing? The national fertilizer is 2,500 shillings per 50 kilogram bag. And the county government has responded by producing their own fertilizer of 3,840 50 kilogram bag on the argument that they have lowered the price, their purchasing price, by 40%. The national government should not just sit back, honorable members, on the assumption that because agriculture is fully devolved, then they leave it to the governors to do what they want with agriculture. The fertilizer by the national government of 2,500 should now be forced upon governors so that all wananchi in the farming counties can access cheaper fertilizer for us to achieve food stability. With those many reasons, I oppose this bill.
He's done. Okay, please proceed.
Just inform me.
Madam Speaker, it's unfortunate that Senator Kalolia sat down, but when I was moving the bill, I indicated that in this House, we benefit from the wisdom of 2 members who were there in Naivasha when we decided on 47 counties. I thought Senator Mugatana would address that, and I also hoped Senator Kalwale would address that, so that those of us who are not there can be guided. But it's unfortunate that he has already taken his seat.
Order. I don't think that was for response. I don't think that requires your response. No. You had already sat. Senator Halwale? No, you don't. I don't think you need to respond. You don't have to respond. Behind the tent. Senator Halwale, you may do that behind the tent. Senator Sifuna?
Madam Speaker, thank you for that intervention that ensures that at least the senators who have spoken allow us to also contribute on this bill. Yes, I'll first start by saying, Madam Speaker, as both a lawyer and the Senator of Nairobi, I feel attacked this afternoon. So allow me to start by disabusing some of the notions that have been painted. The simplest one, of course, is the accusation that came from the majority leader, that somehow he does not see or does not see why it is necessary for lawyers to be part of some of these bodies that are being proposed in various pieces of legislation. I wanted the majority leader to note that if you look at the proposal in the bill itself, it is a mediation committee we are talking about. So a mediation committee, I don't know how, where to begin. I think I need to paint a picture for the majority leader what mediation entails. But it is one of those alternative dispute resolution mechanisms that is free from the strictures of litigation, resolution of matters before our courts. And there has developed an area of practice where there are people who are now experts in alternative dispute resolution. And if you see the provision in subsection 7 of the bill, Senator Kajwang has proposed that because this is going to be a dispute resolution mechanism, a mediation committee set up to mediate a matter of a dispute between counties on a matter regarding boundaries, then the person to chair it should be a person with 15 years experience in alternative dispute resolution. I don't think that is a misplaced suggestion. In fact, that committee would benefit immensely by having somebody, not just a lawyer, and not just any lawyer, not even a lawyer who just has 2 or 3 years experience in mediation. No, because of the complex issues that my colleagues have raised here, the bill has provided for somebody with 15 years experience in alternative dispute resolution. And Madam Speaker, on a light note, I have challenged my colleagues here from other professions. If indeed we can find a doctor, a veterinary doctor, or a doctor of Khalwale's caliber, who can be able to do a better job at a mediation meeting than a person with 15 years in alternative dispute resolution, by all means, I don't think the lawyers in this house would object. But what we are saying is nobody should paint the picture that lawyers are somehow imposing themselves in places where they are not needed. In fact, this is one of the areas where a person with that experience would benefit most immensely the job that he has been asked to do. Secondly, Madam Speaker, I have had notions here expressed about whether Nairobi needs to continue as a county. Others have suggested outright that Nairobi needs to be managed differently, that Nairobi should no longer be a county. Madam Speaker, for me, you have to go back to the process of the review of the Constitution. And I was not there, yes. I was still in high school. No, not high school. I was still in the university when some of my colleagues were doing Bomas and Naivasha. But I have had the privilege of reading the final report of the CKRC. And if you read that final report, you will understand the thinking that went into every specific provision of the Constitution and the architecture that we ended up with. The concept or the idea behind devolution, Madam Speaker, does not change based on where the person is or where they live or the circumstances in which they live. the concept of devolution is to get services and resources to the lowest possible unit of administration. Now, lowest units of administration exist just as much in Nairobi as they exist in Homa Bay, where the sponsor of this bill comes from. Madam Speaker, the people of Mukuru kwa Njenga would want direct access to resources and services, just the way somebody in Kanyamwa would insist on direct access to resources and to services. They also want to see government. If you read the CKRC report, Madam Speaker, you will remember Kenyans saying that government is a far-off notion for them. And if you talk to our brothers and sisters from the northern frontier districts, they will tell you that even people moving from Mandera, from Garissa, coming to Nairobi, used to say that now we are going to Kenya. It is because of devolution that places like Turkana, places like Mandera, Wajir, were seeing the first kilometers of tarmac in their counties, Honorable Madam Speaker, so that nobody can argue that a Kenyan living in Nairobi does not deserve devolution. Madam Speaker, in fact, if you recall the reasons that have been advanced by my colleagues, especially the mover of this motion, Senator Kajwang, on why he thinks that Nairobi needs to be managed differently. Madam Speaker, in fact, that matter has already been thought about. There exists on our books a law called the Urban Areas and Cities Act. And Madam Speaker, that act is Cap 275 of the laws of Kenya. It is still on our books. I want to refer you to the objects of this particular bill, and they are found at section 3 of the bill, of the act. They are to provide, the act is to provide for governance and management of urban centers, urban areas and cities. And if you look at clause 4A of that act, which was introduced via an amendment in 2019, it actually provides, Honorable Kajwang, for a mechanism for delineation of boundaries of urban areas and cities. If you go further, Madam Speaker, to section 6 of that act, it provides for management, that there has to be a way to deal with management and infrastructure in the capital city, and that they shall be managed in the same manner as county governments. Then, Madam Speaker, subsection 3 of that section 6 talks about the capital city required to provide infrastructure necessary to sustain, number 1, the seat of national government, number 2, offices of the diplomatic missions, and number 3, commerce and industry. So that, Senator Kajwang, all these factors, the uniqueness of Nairobi, is something that has already been anticipated and thought about. And there exists a law to provide a mechanism for collaboration between the national government and the county government of Nairobi for us to be able to manage the unique issues that exist in Nairobi that don't exist in Homa Bay town. I am sure there is no diplomatic posting in Homa Bay. So, Madam Speaker, the problem has been that if you look at subsection 6, subsection 5 of the Urban Areas and Cities Act, there is a requirement for national government and the county government to enter into an agreement regarding the performance of the functions and delivery of services by the capital city. And this is where we are stuck. Because the national government has repeatedly failed to come through on its responsibilities to ensure that Nairobi City County, as the capital city, the seat of government, and the host of diplomatic missions, is able to undertake these particular functions. And it is compounded, Madam Speaker, by the fact that national government institutions, including Parliament, have refused to pay rates to the county government of Nairobi. As we speak today, national government institutions owe Nairobi City County over 100 billion Kenya shillings in unpaid rates. All these institutions that we host here, it would be very easy for us to be able to provide these services, Madam Speaker, to make sure that you enjoy the sort of infrastructure you want to enjoy in the city county, if the national government did its bit. Do you know, Madam Speaker, that Nairobi City County has an outstanding pending bill of electricity owed to Kenya Power and Lighting Company, equivalent to the equitable share of Lamu County, 2 billion shillings, as we speak today. And it is because, again, Senator Khalwale comes from Kakamega, when he tells his people he's going to Nairobi, there's a certain expectation of the sort of life he's going to lead in Nairobi. He's not going to drive on dark roads as if he's driving to Musanda. No. He wants to drive from his home in Karen to, to here in the Senate, while the road he's driving on is properly lit. So these unique needs of the county of Nairobi should not make people start telling us that somehow the people of Nairobi do not deserve devolution. I was sitting somewhere at a hotel here in Nairobi in February of 2020, and a breaking news item came on the news, Madam Speaker, that the then Governor Sonko was actually at State House signing a deed of transfer of functions of the county government to the national government. I was in shock. I couldn't believe it. In fact, Madam Speaker, it is the one time that I've been caught flat-footed about the possibility of such things happening under sanction of our constitution. I didn't know that it could be done. I was in shock. Madam Speaker, 2 months later, Governor Sonko was saying he signed that thing under duress. In April of 2020, he told us that he was signing it under duress. And it was a dark time for those of us who believe in devolution, because the question is still out there. Those of us who are of the opinion that Nairobi needs to be managed differently, Madam Speaker, has the NMS done any better? As we speak today, over 20 billion shillings outstanding still as pending bills. They hired people the same way that the county government does. Madam Speaker, there were very serious questions as to whether the NMS was following procurement procedures in some of the works that you saw being done at lightning speed, because they were not as hamstrung by the same rules of procurement that the county government was hamstrung. We have a problem with leadership in Nairobi. And as I have explained to you, even in 2020, part of the problem was the then leadership. Madam Speaker, I think I've dwelt enough on this particular subject, so that allow me to deal with the substance of this bill. But I beg my colleagues not to look at Nairobi as a problem, as a county that needs to be managed by a manager. No, the people of Nairobi have suffrage. They deserve services being devolved to the lowest possible level. They deserve to see members of county assembly, people they can ask about the road passing outside their house. They deserve to be able to ask the governor why the garbage at Umoja Inako has not been collected since September. Who will they ask, Honorable Halwale, when you tell us that there is this manager who's going to come? And the experience of the NMS was that the manager for Nairobi City County was hauled up at State House, an institution you know some of us in the opposition cannot be allowed to visit. So, Madam Speaker, for me, I want to be able to see the governor, the person responsible for my resources. I want to be able to see the MCA, and so on and so forth. And I want this House to know that those problems of employment, overemployment, and spending the bulk of the money on personal emoluments and salaries are also present in Nairobi. If you speak to the finance officer in Nairobi, she will tell you that the exchequer amount that comes to Nairobi every month is equivalent to the salary that goes out. So very little in terms of revenue excesses for development is left. But Nairobi has potential to collect so much in terms of on-source revenue. And Madam Speaker, the problem is that we have not been able to see loopholes. As we speak right now in the County Assembly of Nairobi, there's a very serious inquiry into the revenue streams, whether we are collecting, whether we are managing our own revenue management system. When my governor appeared before the committee that is led very ably by the Senator for Homa Bay, he told us that the servers running the revenue collecting system were at City Hall, that he can see them. Madam Speaker, Senator Kajwang will be shocked to learn today that in fact those servers, nobody knows where they are. Nobody knows where they are. The MCAs have tried to ask questions. The governor is dodgy. And nobody can show you. If we go to City Hall, which is just walking distance from here, you will not see those servers. So, Madam Speaker, allow me to say that the object of the bill sponsored by Senator Kajwang has nothing to do with the arguments of the viability of counties. In fact, that is a discussion that was had a long time ago. I remember the final Bomas draft, Madam Speaker, had proposed 14 counties. How that was decimated, and we ended up with units that everybody says are not viable is a matter for history and a matter that can be corrected through proposals such as the ones that Senator Khalwale is making. But Madam Speaker, I am happy because Senator Kajwang has thought about a matter that precedes the kicking in of Article 188. Because Article 188 only talks about alteration of the boundaries. But what Senator Kajwang is thinking of is before we get to the stage of alteration of boundaries, can we sit down and have a conversation about what the dispute is? I would be very happy, Madam Speaker, if this bill was put in place as soon as yesterday, because as you know, there is a fight going on between the counties of Nyamira and Kisii as we speak over Keroka town. And it is all about the pressure that has come from everyone about counties trying to raise their own source revenues. They see Keroka town as a market, as a source for that own source revenue that every county is working to achieve. Madam Speaker, therefore, I want to say that the bill is very well thought out. It has provided a mechanism for us to be able to appoint a mediation committee that is chaired by somebody with expertise in alternative dispute resolution. And it has even said if you are an advocate who is guilty of professional misconduct, you cannot be eligible for appointment for these particular committees. Madam Speaker, when you talk about alteration of boundaries, I have sat in that committee led by Senator Kajwang, and I have come to learn that people are very passionate about their counties. In fact, Senator Khalwale, if we were doing this meeting in Mashinani, Senate Mashinani, you would not have left that county where we were doing that Senate Mashinani if those sentiments were made on the floor. If you go to Nyamira and you tell the people of Nyamira that they should be governed from Kisii, they will lynch you. If you try and convince the people of Homa Bay that probably if you are together with Migori and Kisumu and Siaya, you can be able to do better and bigger, Madam Speaker, you would be lynched, because there was a misconception at the beginning of devolution that counties belong to certain people, certain tribes. I will not shy away from saying certain tribes. Madam Speaker, it is so bad that if you come from Bungoma, it is impossible for you to be employed in Kakamega. And we're all lawyers. They say, wewe uko na kwenu. That's a quotation. Don't say that I have offended the standing orders by going into another language. Madam Speaker, they will tell you from Bungoma, you also have a county. Why don't you go and apply there? So it has gotten so bad that, in fact, the discussion within some counties is for even greater disintegration. Senator Khalwale would be aware of the agitation by the people from Sabaot in Mount Elgon in Bungoma for them to have their own county, or for the Tesos in Busia, or indeed in Migori, where what are they called? The Kuria, yes, are also agitating that they need their own county. For as long as that county exists to pay salaries to their children, many people are very content. And I've challenged senators, I've asked them, if you sat your county people down and told them, we have 2 billion shillings here, should we do a road, or everybody lines up and gets something to eat today? What do you think the people will say? Correct, because the appreciation of devolution was misconceived at some point to mean this is ours. For as long as we are eating it, it is Bukusu's eating Bungoma, it is the people of Kakamega eating Kakamega, then there is no problem. Madam Speaker, so that when these disputes arise, all these disputes you see, they are not because of anything else, but because people have sentimental value for these counties, and proposing anything else is going to be very unpopular. And therefore, Madam Speaker, when you see the threshold that has been set in this bill by Senator for Homa Bay, Kajwang, 2/3 of the National Assembly, 2/3 of the Senate, and I believe there is also a provision that the county assembly of the concerned counties must also do what? Must also participate in that decision making. Madam Speaker, when you go to clause 17, the people who can bring a petition for alteration, the bill lists any registered voter, an MCA, a senator, member of National Assembly, and governor. I want the proposer of the bill to tell me why there is a difference, and probably the language in clause 17, Senator Kajwang, should be replicated in section 5 that proposes who can request for a mediation committee. Because once you leave out the members of the National Assembly under clause 5 or section 5, they might feel left out. So I would propose that the bill if it allows for people who can petition to include senators, MCAs, and member of National Assembly, then, Madam Speaker, it should be reflected also under the requirements for the people or the qualifications or the people who can ask for mediation committee. It also asks that the petition for alteration must be supported by 15% of registered voters. These thresholds are reflected in other legislation. For instance, on dissolution of a county government, Madam Speaker, whenever there is a dispute between the county assembly and the governor that is irreconcilable. Then, Madam Speaker, on the mediation committee, I had spoken to Senator Kajwang on the language at subsection 6, because the bill as currently drafted, I just want to read it, Madam Speaker. It says that where a resolution has been made by the Senate for the establishment of a mediation committee under section 5.1, the President shall, within 14 days of receipt of the resolution, appoint a mediation committee with approval of the Senate. That, to me, looks like repetition, Honorable Madam Speaker, because you don't need, after the resolution of Senate has been made, you don't need again, when the President is appointing the committee, to again approve that appointment.
Your time is up, Senator Sifuna. Senator Mofaya.
The bill before us, Madam Speaker, is very emotive. And the father of this bill, who also happens to my friend and chairman of my committee, has brought a very emotive debate in this house today. And from the onset, Madam Speaker, I wish to oppose this bill, because as we always say, politics is local. Intentions of this bill are good, but the drafter, the father of the bill, did not do enough research, because I've captured some issues that are not very much impressive, especially from the Tharaka County, where I normally come from. Honorable Speaker, I have a very long story to tell. The Tharaka, which is historically marginalized, has for decades suffered under the hands of the Meru County. Every day in, there is a lot of encroachment from our neighboring county. We have lost lives, we have lost chunks of land, we have seen people displaced. We have, people have suffered historically, and I'm happy that I've been able to supply the draft those bill, or the fall of this bill, or Kajwang, with sufficient evidence to show that what is really contained in this bill is not what is reflected on the ground. Honorable Speaker, I remember in 1997, 1996 crashes, where some government systems, through, of course, who were in power at that time, came and burnt houses, took land, schools were burnt, people were evicted. In some places called Njoguni, Kenyongo, Torimatuamburi, Kanjoro areas, people lost land, people lost lives, people lost livestock. And up to now, the Tharaka County, of Madam Speaker, is the only county in the entire Eastern Province where we have the entirely displaced persons who have never been resettled up to date. So when I read this bill, Honorable Speaker, it really brings a lot of nostalgia that this bill has not been able to address those pertinent issues that are delivering some of those areas in the Tharaka County. Madam Speaker, if you look at the drafter just brought in some issues to do with the mediation committee. But Madam Speaker, if you look the entire process, the important issue is a political process. It's a political process, Madam Speaker, and the people have been campaigning on this platform that once you elect me, I'm going to make sure that you get your land back. So it's something bigger than meets the eye. That some communities, they use this position, their position in government, their position in power, to make sure that they try to evict the less fortunate, the who are not in power in that particular time. So, Madam Speaker, I would outrightly want to oppose this bill, because it has not captured some of those the issues that we have to get involved in, especially in Madaraka County, where we have historical issues, all the way ranging from Toronto location, cutting across Torema location, all the way to Morinda, to Akurungu, to Tunyai, because every day, every year, every month, we have the Meru County, they are our neighbors, and encroaching on Tharaka County, and it's something, Honorable Speaker, that I'm happy that because I've been able to supply the draft with the relevant information. We have the Kenya Constitution of 1966, which stipulates exactly the boundary between Tharaka and Meru County, which extends all the way to Kenya or to Kemuhumo. That information is there. If you look at the Meru National Park, Madam Speaker, it was capped from as application County Kanjoro in 1966. That information has not been captured. And it's important, Honorable Speaker, that before this bill is discussed, the drafter, who also happens to be my good friend and the chair, we'll have to revisit the research and get to put the right records in place so that Tharaka County is not disadvantaged. So another issue, Madam Speaker, is that the mechanism that is being put to maybe to have these things solved is not offering solutions. Because I've stated, Madam Speaker, that this is a political process. Most of these border disputes are manifested through politics. It's just pure political. And I didn't want to capture what Mungatana said, that we don't need a lawyer. We need somebody who understands the basics on the ground to make sure that this person habilitates or sits down to make sure that we have a strong mediation committee which is supposed to make sure that we have a permanent solution. Because it's, Madam Speaker, it is shameful that 60 years down the line, we are discussing about boundaries in this country, and it's high time, Madam Speaker, that we must come up with a permanent solution to make sure that Kenyans live peacefully and coexist just like brothers and sisters. So, Madam Speaker, now that my issues are not being addressed, I wish to strongly oppose this bill until my concerns are being addressed by this bill. I oppose.
Senator Osoti.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for giving me an opportunity to also make presentation on this very important bill, the County Boundaries Bill. Madam Speaker, this bill is long overdue. It's long overdue, though about 4 attempts have been made by the past Senate to resolve this issue. The latest being in the 12th Parliament, or the last Senate, where this bill actually died in the National Assembly after having been passed by the Senate. Madam Speaker, as I stand here, I represent a county that has had a long-standing dispute on boundary with the Kisumu County at Maseno, as had been alluded to by the mover of this motion. Madam Speaker, every weekend when I go home, I'm always confronted by people asking me when is the issue of Maseno will be resolved. And I have been telling them that there is a bill before the Senate to give framework to this process. And Madam Speaker, I must commend the Senator for Homa Bay for coming up with this bill. This bill, if you read through it, Madam Speaker, it is basically giving a framework on how county boundary issues are going to be handled. It may not contain the nitty-gritties as my good friend Senator Mofaya is requesting, but at least it gives a framework of how